Our first speaker is Mr. Dan Sturrock. He's the Director, Business Development and Transactions at the Australian Renewable Energy Agency. Dan has more than 20 years experience in investment banking and project finance, including the past 10 years working across a range of roles and technologies in the renewable energy sector. For the past 10 years, he has worked as a senior member of ARENA's origination team across a broad range of technologies and projects, including utility-scale solar PV, energy storage, and other emerging renewable energy technologies. Dan's talk today is ARENA's evolving ambitions and achievements in solar PV. I believe it's a very interesting topic for most of us today. Please, Dan.
Thanks, Rebecca, for the introduction, and it's a privilege to be here this morning down in Melbourne this year, which is my original hometown, so it's always nice to be back in Melbourne. And I was chatting to Rebecca on the way and remembering walking up Swanston Street on the way to uni at Melbourne Uni, and it's good to see all the changes that have been happening in this part of Melbourne. A lot of construction, just like Sydney, which is where I live now. It was really great to hear the introductions. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land as well, and also Minister Ambrosio. I thought that was a really good introduction and got my mind going with all the different things that we're working on at ARENA and everything being very interconnected. Solar PV obviously being the topic for this conference, and all the things that sit underneath that topic is huge, but also the work that Solar Victoria is doing and the work around electrification, which is another area that we're very involved in at ARENA, and me personally as well. So I'm sure most people here are probably just interested in the solar PV part, but I've got a broader set of things that I'm working on. But I'm happy to say that solar PV is a very big part of that right now. I think I said that last year up in Newcastle, that I was really getting more and more involved in the research side, and working with the ACAP extension, working with the R&D round, and today working very much with a much broader set of things that we're doing around ultra low cost solar and manufacturing. So that was just my introductory ramble. I'll now refer to my notes. So I guess also, here we are in December after a really big year, and it's been a big year in solar and a really big year talking about the topic of today, which is the role of manufacturing as well, as part of the ultra low cost solar vision that ARENA has, which is starting to catch on across Australia. It is a really hot topic at the moment, and we've got a report coming out shortly that I've been involved in with APVI and Muriel and Oliver over there, which is soon to be released. It was going to be released this week, but we've delayed the release slightly to align with other plans and ambitions. And so you'll just have to watch this space, but we'll be talking about that this conference, and this role of manufacturing as part of the cost down and the scale up. So just starting off with ARENA's mission, which I've sort of touched on a little bit there already. You can see the slide there. So we've got this global ambition supporting the transition to net zero emissions, accelerating the pace of pre-commercial innovation and to the benefit of Australia. And it's only a few words there on the page, but it actually, obviously, there's a lot in there. I mean, the global ambition is obviously a really strong tie into solar PV research, because historically, that's where we've made some really big contributions to the renewable energy revolution, and we plan to continue to do that, particularly in the area of solar PV. Accelerating the pace of pre-commercial innovation is obviously key to what ARENA does. We don't always work on early stage technologies. We work on some proven technologies as well, but it's all about overcoming barriers to scale up and cost down. And to the benefit of Australia, it's a global mission, but we do have to think about, I guess, what the Australian taxpayers getting from the dollars that go into ARENA and then go into the projects. And I guess on the theme of solar PV, that's a big theme, because we can build the IP, we can build the skills, we can create the jobs, we can de-risk the energy transition. So all benefits to Australia. So moving to the next slide, and I've probably touched on this a little bit as well, but decarbonising the grid is the first stage, and as we heard from Minister D'Ambrosio, that's a short-term, sort of medium-term ambition. We've got the next 10 years to get to 90% in Victoria. That's just 10 years away. So that's sort of the here and now. Decarbonising industry and transport is obviously starting now, but a slightly longer-term transition. And then in the longer term, there's even the opportunity to use technologies like direct air capture through ultra-low-cost solar to actually create those negative emissions and achieve the climate targets that we all are committing to, and trying to accelerate those. So, we need to double the rate of installations or triple the rate of installations of solar just in that medium term to decarbonise the grid, and then we need to double again and again every 4 or 5 years to achieve these sort of targets. And so when we think about what's required there, it's obviously both the innovation to drive down costs at the same time as doing all the things we need to do to drive up scale, which is possibly just as challenging, but we believe achievable. So I'm sure this audience here is already very well aware of the work around solar module efficiencies and also probably the reduction in installed costs that are required to get us there. I guess this audience is probably more focused on the first point. At ARENA, we're equally focused on driving down construction costs through disruptive technologies and smarter ways to build solar farms. And that's an area that we're just starting to progress and really hoping to build that over the next few years as part of our ultra low cost solar vision. But we also need a secure solar supply chain and at massive scale. That's the third point on the slide. And then there's those other sort of barriers and challenges around land access approvals and grid connections, which we're also very conscious of, and we seek to address through some of the other things we're doing, working with AEMO and kind of what we call large-scale integration. Before we get into the sort of core topic of solar manufacturing and the opportunities there to do that at scale in Australia, and the work of the Silicon to Solar study that APVI has been working on, I'd like to just reflect briefly on some of the big news over the year in solar PV. And I'm sure a lot of you already know this, but it was always interesting for me just to go back and look through the headlines and see all the things that have been going on. So as I did my little recap of just 12 months, I could see that the renewable energy penetration in Australia has ticked up from 32.5% a couple of years ago to 35.9% last year, and growing strongly. And we can see that the rooftop solar is playing a huge role in that, and adding about 3 gigawatts a year, and looking to break records again this year, and seeing that rooftop solar is not only the number of homes increasing, but the system size is getting up to 10 kilowatts on average per house is really, really interesting to see, just that continued trajectory. On the R&D side, we've seen many big announcements in the last 12 months. I saw that Oxford Labs is claiming a record of 28.6% efficiency for a commercial size cell. We saw SunDrive breaking records about a year ago with 26.4% efficiency. So we're still seeing these very exciting efficiency breakthroughs. Never quite sure, being non-technical, exactly how you compare them, because they're always a bit of devil in the detail, but I'll leave that to you guys. But it's good to see just those frontiers being constantly pushed and stretched. I saw also in July a team at UNSW announced they had developed a recycling system that can extract 99% of the components from a solar panel, including silver, for potential reuse. And that's obviously great as well. And ARENA is looking to get more and more involved in solar recycling as well, really as a as a, I guess, an adjunct to building the supply chains at scale. Because if we can produce solar at scale, we also need to be able to recycle solar at scale, and that's obviously got a very positive feedback loop if we can do that effectively. I saw 2 weeks ago, Longi, I was never quite sure how to pronounce Longi, claimed a world record efficiency of 33.9% for a silicon perovskite tandem cell. Again, sounds amazing, and it makes you think that 30% cell efficiency for a commercial solar cell is achievable. Obviously these sort of breakthroughs are not yet commercial production, but really positive in terms of those research frontiers moving into commercialisation, which is what ARENA's really focused on achieving, pulling through these technologies and then making them real at scale. Of course, many of these recent technical breakthroughs are building on the long history of cutting-edge Australian university research, including the PERC solar cell, which is now the foundation of 90% of solar cells globally. And again, it's just that really great story of all the work that gets done over a long period of time pays off. We've now got a shorter period of time, but we need to double down on our efforts as an industry and as an ecosystem to make sure that we're doing everything we can to accelerate. All of these advances represent small but steady advances to the ultra low cost solar vision. As I've said, 30% cell efficiency, sub $20 LCOE, and just 7 years away to 2030. It's also worth reflecting just 7 years ago, because 2030 is 7 years away, where were we in solar? In Australia, when I went back through some of the documents in our system, the installed cost of solar for utility scale was around $1.80 a watt, and the LCOE was sort of in that sort of low hundreds, $110, $120 a megawatt hour, and that was when we were doing our our large scale solar competitive round. And since then, we've seen the LCOE of solar halve and the installed cost of solar in upfront terms almost halve. So we've obviously seen some efficiencies in terms of yields coming through as well, and obviously OPEX as well. And lower interest rates probably helped as well, although they're going back up. So we've seen a lot of really big progress, and we need to do the same again over the next 7 years. That's the challenge we face. When we think about how do we do that, it's really obviously the research is critical, but it's also the disruptive approaches to building solar farms, and that's where ARENA's been working with companies like 5B, but other projects that are yet to be announced that are looking at automation and how that can both accelerate the speed of building utility scale solar, but also reducing the cost of it significantly. Having said that, we're not expecting any silver bullets. It's going to be a large number of innovations that have to be stacked and integrated to drive down that cost of installed solar to where we need it to be over the next decade. There's also obviously a little bit of sobering news out there as well, particularly around the utility scale. The amount of new capacity reaching financial investment decision has really reduced significantly over the last few years, with only 500 megawatts of new capacity reaching investment decision in the first half of this year. A lot of that's related to connection approvals, but also permitting has been hard, and social license as well. We've got a huge pipeline of projects. I think 18 gigawatts is a number I saw from AMO. But it's really struggling to get into construction and getting connection agreements. The Clean Energy Regulator has downplayed its expectations for this year, saying that new utility scale investment may not reach 3 gigawatts. That's wind and solar, and has noted the rising cost of connection and inflation generally as being slowing down the pipeline. The Clean Energy Regulator projects that 40% renewables may be achieved by the end of the year, so those penetrations are inching up, but there's a huge increase that needs to happen to get to the 82% target, at least doubling, probably tripling. The government's recently announced capacity investment scheme is designed to accelerate that pipeline, but again, the connection processes and other things are separate issues that need to be addressed. Moving to some of the international developments in solar PV. It's a big world out there, and again, good to see a lot of activity across the world. So in China, there was an article in the Sydney Morning Herald just a week ago noting that China's output of solar panels was 310 gigawatts in 2022, and it's going to be 500 gigawatts this year, and 1,000 gigawatts in just 2 years' time. Apparently, that's 4 times more than the total amount of installations installed worldwide last year. China's target of net zero by 2060 is reported to be achieved a decade earlier than previously assumed, and perhaps earlier than even in Europe. And the IEA reports that China accounts for 60% of new solar and wind installations globally. When we look at the cost of solar modules, Bloomberg New Energy Finance is recently reporting that the price of solar modules in US dollars is down at 12 cents a watt, which is below the cost of production. That's all I guess, probably mainly positive, but also quite amazing, and also creates a lot of challenges, I think, for the sector in terms of the volatility in prices. In the United States, the Inflation Reduction Act is leading an investment boom, particularly in solar module manufacturing. More than 60 gigawatts of new solar capacity has been announced in module production, 35 gigawatts of capacity in cell production, up from around 3 gigawatts, so 10 times increase. 10 gigawatts of announcements in ingots and wafers, starting from basically zero, and 29 gigawatts in polysilicon. Those are figures from the American Clean Power Association, and I guess always to be taken with a grain of salt in terms of announcements versus things that actually get built. But the point being, there's a big boom on, driven by government incentives, and we'll see how that plays out. The US boom does face challenges from the declining prices of modules, as I noted before, and I think a lot of investments may not reach production as people grapple with those prices. There's also political uncertainty and legal uncertainty that's being worked through in terms of those government incentives, I guess, impacting financing decisions. In Europe, there's also challenges. There was news just a week ago from REC Group in Norway closing down polysilicon production in Norway due to competitive disadvantages with China. And also in Norway, so who knew that Norway was so big in solar? Wafer manufacturer Norsun announced layoffs due to increased pressures relating to Europe's stockpile of solar modules imported from China. So again, it's a global system, and there's a lot of feedback loops, both positive and negative. But these sort of boom-bust cycles in terms of oversupply of modules is really creating some challenges for those trying to build up supply chains. Moving our focus back to the topic of what's going on in Australia in manufacturing for PV. Well, we're starting from a pretty low base, as we know. We've got a very limited production capability with Tindo in South Australia. We've got a number of companies, including Tindo, SunDrive, and others, looking to scale up module manufacturing. I noted that Fortescue Future Industries had also announced plans to develop a gigawatt manufacturing facility for its HIAT technology. Again, not sure whether that's still on the cards, but it tells you that there's quite a bit happening. There's quite a bit of ambition. Moving away from modules, Quinbrook had declared its plans to develop 10 gigawatts of polysilicon production in Queensland. But all of this will require significant support from both state and federal government to close the economic gap, because it's a tough market out there, and China dominates. So why and how would solar PV manufacturing take off from here in Australia? And that's the question that the Silicon to Solar study has sought to answer. The work started about a year ago, and it's been a very busy year. In the middle of the year, ARENA also released its white paper on ultra low cost solar, and all of this thinking's really building momentum in terms of people wrestling with the questions, and the government, I can tell you, is paying a lot of attention and trying to understand the opportunities and the challenges, and it'll be an interesting year next year as that thinking develops. So just on to the next slide that sort of paints a little bit of a picture of both the scale and the reasons why we would manufacture locally. I've talked about the scale up, and you can see there on this slide that huge increase if we're going to achieve I guess the broader decarbonisation plans of Australia, moving into sort of industrial and hydrogen, is getting you into that 50 gigawatts a year, up from 5 gigawatts, so 10 times increase over the next decade or so. And I guess the why, really, is if we're going to have a hydrogen economy, if we're going to have a future fuels strategy, we're going to decarbonise heavy industry. All of these things require low-cost solar at scale. And when I think about there's those sort of those benefits, but it's also a lot of it is about risk. You really do wonder, is it a sound strategy to rely on a single source of supply for 50% of any nation's future energy needs? And Australia is not alone there. The US is grappling with the same, I guess, risk question. So is Canada and Europe, and that's why all of these economies are really considering and investing in local supply chain. And if we can manage those supply chain risks, then we can open up these opportunities to build manufacturing capabilities, create high quality jobs, and reduce costs of the transition. So just a very simple slide on the supply chain. I'm sure this audience understands at least this more than I do, but it's been really interesting to understand those industrial processes moving into polysilicon, ingots and wafers, very interesting and highly technical processes, which ultimately end up in the modules that we know and love and put on our roofs. But a lot of really interesting technical challenges on the way through, but certainly achievable with the right approach, with the right incentives, with the right partners. Australia can do all of these things. But it's not something that can happen overnight. It does need a lot of collaboration across industry and across government to really map out that plan and consider which parts we do first, how do we do them, what are the opportunities to extract synergies between some of the steps, and what do we do locally, and how do we partner with other countries to really build a resilient supply chain. Thinking about the how, the report concludes that Australia's superpower potential is possible, but it can only be achieved through a carefully designed framework of government support. The study looks at the role of grants, production credits, and concessional finance, and probably, no surprise, all of those things have a role to play, but revenue support is really critical. The study also looks at the economic gap, which ranges from almost 100% in the polysilicon step in terms of the gap to Chinese cost of production, down to about 10% in module manufacturing. But there's also an important question. All of these things are sort of oversimplified. And when we think about the opportunities to export product to the US and other markets, there's probably opportunities to extract premiums, both locally and exporting to places like the US, which can help close that gap potentially. There's also an interesting thought in terms of what we're doing in hydrogen with Hydrogen Head Start, where ARENA's helping close that revenue gap through a contract for difference type of grant product. So it just shows that there's a lot of different ways to skin the cat, and we've got to think carefully about what is the appropriate approach depending on our objectives in solar. Then there's the when. Reflecting the critical timing of Australia's decarbonisation push, the report calls for immediate action, noting that module manufacturing can potentially be established very quickly, even in the next 2 years, starting from here. Upstream manufacturing is likely to have development timelines of 5 years or more, but again, got to start now if we're going to be producing polysilicon or ingots and wafers in 2030. The report notes that a more streamlined permitting regime will be an important enabler for attracting and scaling up solar PV manufacturing as well. So all those soft costs and challenges are really significant, just like building utility scale solar farms being slowed down by 2 years. That's the same thing for these manufacturing plants. Then there's the question of who. The report, when you do read it, is probably a bit less clear on which government entities might lead the charge on solar manufacturing. That's for the next stage of consideration. However, it's clear that ARENA, the CESC and the NRF could all play a significant role in moving this along. Moving on to recommendations. So the study has a number of recommendations, and here's just I guess the 5 key ones that I think are worth sharing here. So the first thing is to establish solar PV manufacturing as a strategic priority industry. I think sort of reading between the lines, I think it already is, but it's not official yet. Then there's the question of setting up a task force, which makes it really clear, what is the plan and what parts of government need to be involved. Then there's the type of support that's required, whether it's concessional finance, grants or production credits, really considering those different levers. Prioritising the rollout of the enabling support, people, permits and partners, and delivering demand-side report, which could be government procurement and local content incentives. So all very exciting. Still a lot of work to go, but really great to have that level of thinking done at this point. Before I move to Q&A, that's a little bit preemptive. Just want to touch that ARENA's really keen to step up over the next year or two. As I said, we're doing a lot of work around disruptive technologies in building solar PV. We're looking to do further work in terms of R&D funding, and we really want to engage with the research community around what's working, what can be improved, how can ARENA do the next wave of R&D funding, and to the extent that there's technologies that are ready to commercialise, really encourage you to come forward and talk to ARENA proactively, and we'll be running some roundtables early next year. My colleague Victor over there is going to organise those. I'm looking forward to participating as well to really understand what's going on in the research side and how can we pull that through into commercialisation. So stay tuned for more announcements, both the silicon to solar study being one, but other things that we're working on which are also pretty exciting. They're all part of a pretty complex ecosystem of what needs to happen to make this vision of ultra low cost solar at scale a reality in the next decade. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So now open for 2 questions. Probably we still have time.
Yeah, I wasn't sure, but
we still have time.
I put the Q&A slide on there in case there's any questions.
We do have time for 2 questions. Who want to make a start? Yes, please.
I thought you might have a warm-up one for me, Rebecca.
Good day, Dan. My name's Ashley Brunson. I'm wondering if ARENA or the government are ready to announce what some of the concessional financing amounts would be, or when.
Yeah, it's a pretty easy question to say. Unfortunately, no. I mean, I think the report when it's published is kind of the starting point for that discussion. And as I said, I think a recommendation of a task force to really look into that and to consider what are the levers is kind of the next stage. I mean, in terms of the when, you'd sort of think sometime in the first half of next year. But exactly when, I can't answer.
Great. Thank you, Dan. More questions? Yes, please, Ned.
Hi, thank you, Dan. My name's Ned from UNSW. So I picked up on 2 things from what you said. One was huge investment in the United States with PV manufacturing, but then also the opportunity for us in Australia to sell to the United States. And so I was just wondering how we balance that, because it seems like the United States might be ahead of us in terms of actually building stuff. How does ARENA see us navigating that one?
Well, it's sort of emerging views because it is complex. But I think, I'll defer, I'll quote Oliver over here because he's done all of the research here. But what's happening in the US, they're not going to meet all of their requirements. They're looking for other, trade partners to help them deliver on their vision and their needs, which is obviously massive, given their economy is 10 times the size of ours. So there's the opportunity to fill gaps. And that could be polysilicon, it could be ingots and wafers, could potentially even be modules or cells. I mean, everything can be exported at relatively low cost, which ultimately comes down to markets. If you can produce the product at a reasonable price, and if there's advantages in product not coming directly from China into the US, then that's an opportunity for export across the supply chain.
Okay, thank you.